Dylan and Grace had been married for 6 years, their relationship a testament to the saying, opposites attract. Grace was fiery and impulsive, her emotions often flaring like a summer storm, while Dylan exuded a calm, steady demeanor, his quiet strength at times bordering on indifference. Despite his composed nature, Grace's jealousy seemed boundless, an enigma to Dylan, who prided himself on being transparent and punctual. He was meticulous in communicating his whereabouts, always notifying her if he was running late, and he expected the same honesty in return. Yet, Grace never explicitly voiced the reasons behind her jealousy, a possessiveness that seemed to simmer just beneath the surface. For years, Dylan had broached the topic of starting a family, envisioning their lives enriched by the pitter-patter of little feet. But Grace, with her fiercely independent spirit, skillfully dodged these discussions, citing career aspirations and an unwillingness to be tethered by the responsibilities of motherhood. Dylan tried to be patient, understanding her hesitations, but the passing years made him yearn for more, a shared future filled with new life and purpose. Amid his dreams of expanding their family, Grace's behavior took a perplexing turn. She began spending longer hours at work, often neglecting to inform Dylan of her delays. At first, he brushed it off, trusting her unconditionally. But over time, her frequent absences and vague explanations gnawed at him. Was there more to her busy schedule than met the eye? One evening, as they shared a quiet dinner, Grace nonchalantly mentioned an upcoming trip to her parents' house. She explained that they needed her help with a few matters and that it had been a while since they'd seen her. Sensing an opportunity to reconnect, Dylan suggested, "Why don't I come with you? We haven't traveled anywhere together in ages. It could be a chance to mix business with pleasure." Grace's response was swift and unsettling. With a detached expression, she pulled away from his touch. "That won't be necessary. I want to go alone," she said, her voice carefully measured. Dylan was stunned but reluctant to press her further. He hoped the time apart would help her regain her composure and perhaps ease the unspoken tensions brewing between them. The following day, after Grace had left, Dylan went grocery shopping after work. As he perused the meat section, inspecting cuts for freshness, a flash of color in his peripheral vision caught his attention. Turning, he saw a familiar face. Hannah, an old friend of Grace's. Her shopping cart was nearly overflowing, but her expression was troubled, a faint grimace creasing her features. Dylan called out to her, and Hannah turned, her face lighting up with recognition. They exchanged pleasantries, and as they spoke, Hannah casually asked about Grace. When Dylan mentioned that she had gone to her parents' house, Hannah's face fell. "Gone," she repeated, her tone a mix of surprise and confusion. "That's strange. She didn't say anything to me." She fell silent, her brows knitting together in thought. Then, as if struck by a sudden realization, she looked at Dylan with a newfound urgency. "Are you busy right now?" she asked abruptly. "Would you like to grab some coffee? There's a cafe nearby." Dylan hesitated, gesturing toward her full cart. "What about your groceries? And your husband, isn't he with you?" "Nathan?" "No, he's not here," she replied, her tone tinged with sadness. "But if you could help me with these bags, I'd be so grateful." Dylan agreed with a chuckle, of course. "I can't let you carry all this by yourself." After helping Hannah carry her groceries home, she invited him in for tea. Reluctant at first, Dylan eventually accepted out of politeness. As they sat together, Hannah quickly prepared snacks, and their conversation began to flow easily. But as the minutes passed, Dylan noticed a subtle shift in her demeanor. She sat closer to him, her tone soft and inviting, a wistful look in her eyes. When she placed a tentative hand on his knee, Dylan froze. The gesture, though subtle, was unmistakable. Resolutely, he leaned back and gently but firmly said, "Hannah, I'm married. And you're married too. Let's not do something we'll regret." His words acted like a splash of cold water. Hannah recoiled, her face flushing with embarrassment. Suddenly, she broke into uncontrollable sobs, burying her face in her hands. Dylan was taken aback, unsure of how to console her. Awkwardly, he reached out and patted her shoulder in a gesture of comfort, but she pulled away sharply. Through her tears, Hannah whispered, "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have done that." Dylan sighed, his emotions a mix of discomfort and compassion. The room grew silent, the air thick with unspoken truths and lingering regret. Hannah buried her face in her hands, her tears streaming uncontrollably as she choked out, "I just wanted to get back at Grace this way." Her sobs echoed through the room, leaving Dylan utterly bewildered. He stared at her, trying to make sense of her cryptic confession. Revenge? On Grace? For what? He asked, incredulous. Hannah looked up, her face streaked with emotion. "Your wife is having an affair with my husband," she revealed, her voice trembling. "And now they've disappeared together, leaving both of us in the dark." Dylan froze, her words slicing through him like a knife. He blinked in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice rising as he pushed the table aside and stood. "Think about it," Hannah said, her tone now sharp with bitterness. "Why didn't she want you to come with her? Do you really believe she went to see her parents, whom she hasn't visited in years?" The implications hit Dylan like a thunderclap. The doubts he'd been trying to suppress surged to the surface, mingling with a fury he rarely felt. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. He needed proof, solid, irrefutable evidence that Hannah's accusations weren't just the desperate ramblings of a heartbroken woman. "Are you sure about this?" Dylan asked, his voice steady but strained. Hannah met his gaze, her eyes burning with conviction. "If you still have doubts, then let's find out," she challenged. "Call your wife, and I'll call my husband. If they're together, we'll know soon enough." With a heavy heart, Dylan pulled out his phone and dialed Grace's number. Each ring felt like an eternity. Finally, she picked up, her voice calm and composed. "Hi, are you home?" Dylan asked, keeping his tone neutral. "Why? Did something happen?" Grace replied, suspicion lacing her words. While Dylan continued speaking to Grace, he gestured for Hannah to call her husband. Moments later, a familiar ringing sound came from Dylan's phone, but it was quickly silenced. Grace had muted the call. Hannah leaned in, whispering, "See? She's with him." Suddenly, Hannah raised her voice, shouting into her phone, "Enjoy your time with Nathan," before abruptly hanging up. She turned to Dylan, her expression a mixture of vindication and sorrow. Dylan's jaw tightened. "Whose apartment is this?" he demanded. "My mother-in-law's," Hannah muttered. "Then pack your things," Dylan said, his tone resolute. "You're coming with me." Together, they left, Dylan's mind spinning with the betrayal that now seemed undeniable. That evening, Grace called in a panic, desperate to explain herself, but Dylan wasn't in the mood for excuses. The next day, Grace arrived at the apartment, her irritation palpable. Dylan stood in the doorway, blocking her entrance. "Let me in, Dylan. What's going on?" "I told you where I was," Grace said, her tone sharp. Dylan didn't budge. "Really? And who were you with, Grace?" he asked coolly. Before Grace could respond, Hannah appeared behind Dylan, clad in a short silk robe, her expression defiant. She smiled faintly and gestured toward the table. Grace's face twisted in shock and fury as she recognized Hannah. But her disbelief quickly gave way to outrage. "You've got some nerve," she spat, glaring at her former friend. Hannah, unfazed, smirked. "Funny. I could say the same about you," she retorted. Dylan remained silent, his gaze cold and unyielding. Finally, he spoke. "Don't come near my apartment again, Grace." With that, he shut the door in her face, leaving her stunned and furious on the other side. In the days that followed, Dylan packed up all of Grace's belongings and sent them to her lover's address. Meanwhile, his connection with Hannah deepened, their shared pain forging an unexpected bond. To their surprise, they found themselves well-matched, and as time passed, they finalized their divorces and began building a new life together. Grace moved in with Nathan, but her bitterness festered. The betrayal had wounded her deeply, leaving scars that refused to heal. Worse still, her jealousy of Nathan intensified, turning their once passionate relationship into a battleground. She criticized him relentlessly, her suspicions and insecurities driving a wedge between them. Nathan, weary of the constant conflict, began staying out later and later, dreading the inevitable arguments waiting for him at home. Their once burning passion fizzled into cold resentment, and Grace found herself alone with nothing but the consequences of her actions. As for Dylan and Hannah, they moved forward, their newfound relationship blossoming. Together, They proved that even from the ashes of betrayal, something beautiful could emerge.